evening, everyone. If we could take a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. We'd like to welcome you to the fire information meeting for the 2023 SRF Lightning Complex and Redwood Lightning Complex. My name is Brenda Bowen. I'm one of the information officers with the Rocky Mountain Complex Incident Management Team 1. In addition to meeting with you here in person, we are also streaming it live on Facebook, and that will be available later for viewing online if you're interested in that. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to provide you with an update on the current status of the fires, as well as a strategic operations update about the future of the fires. On our agenda tonight, we'll start with opening comments from the group tribe. We will then have a welcome from Incident Commander Dan Dallas. Our Operations Section Chief Travis Lip will then provide an update on the current fire situation. Brad Petreska, who is our Strategic Operations Section Chief, will provide an update or an overview of the strategic operations with the complex of fires. And in closing, we will hear from Nolan Colgrove with the Six Rivers National Forest. At that time, once the presenters are done, we will open for questions. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, we will have several information officers that are watching the comments, so please put your questions in the comments and we'll work with you to get those questions answered as well. So with that, let's start with Leaf.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Apparently, Chairman Adbury wasn't able to make it, so welcome on behalf of the group tribe to our country, and glad you're here. And I know that we had a good informative meeting, and I'm sure the presentation tonight will help you answer any of the questions. Really appreciate the indulgence of the community throughout this incident, and I know the team has worked really hard to have open communications with the tribe and the community, and trying to keep everybody informed of what's going on. So really appreciate you guys being here. Look forward to the presentation. Thanks.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name's Dan Dallas. I'm the Incident Commander for the Rocky Mountain Incident Management Team 1. Glad to be, glad to be back in your landscape, and particularly along your rivers. Been here a few times now. When you're in this business, you end up here or close by. Yeah. And so I can rattle off a few fires that you would all be familiar with, but I won't do it. I really liked, it gives me a better word, and that is the indulgence of a community. Not only that, I think you often use the words cooperation, but it's less seldom that I can use the word coordination. And the Natural Resource Department here, other folks knowing the Forest Service have been absolutely fantastic. We would not have had the success we've had so far without the kind of help that we've gotten along the way. I know that folks' interest is to kind of make sure that we don't mess up your landscape, but we certainly never have that intent. But on this one, I think we've had the lightest touch that we could possibly have. And it's a big compliment. One of the things that we feature and try and feature is transparency and just dumping out as much information as we possibly can, but making sure that it's true. That's what Brenda's role, and that's what these folks' role is around here. Very little, oftentimes they also also have another role that's not so fun, but it's to correct rumors, and we've seen very little of that. So with that, looking forward to the presentations here myself, and thanks for your indulgence tonight and your time. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Travis Lipp, one of the operations section chiefs for Rocky Mountain Team 1. Tonight I'm gonna go around the entire complex, just give you an update on the status of all the fires and what the crews have been doing out in the field. And I'm gonna start over at the Perch Fire in Branch 10. A lot of excellent work and progress continues to be made on the Perch Fire. We have our crews have been the last few days, and we'll continue to focus in Division Zulu on the south side, bumping around into Division Juliet, where the firing operation took place about 4 days ago, right before we got here. Those crews continue to secure and mop up those sections of line. We have turned those sections of line from drop point 15 almost all the way up to drop point 11, which we call that area contained. 16, excuse me. So those areas, that's part of the containment that you see percentage. We continue to have crews in there. We didn't get an infrared flight last night, but the previous 2 nights we did. What the infrared IR flight does is give us information where there's heat sources, could be isolated, could be scattered, and especially along the line, just isolated areas of heat, and the crews have been able to go in there and continue to work on those. Currently today, we also have crews where it's drop point 14, it goes down to 13 here, have a chipper in there, have some crews in there cleaning up and doing some chipping operations. Our structure group coming back around, going up to the north towards drop point 19 and down towards 119. Our structure group has completed all the structure assessments. They continue to daily to check our pumps and hoses that we have in place. That's a daily check that is done, and they have begun to backhaul some unnecessary equipment and supplies that are out there. They gather that information on the structure assessments and put it into a program called Field Maps that not only helps us when we're here, but helps us or will help the local community when we leave. We also today, I should mention, up here by drop point 19, we did have a type 1 hotshot crew go in there. There was a road that was kind of brushed out, getting back into a structure, and they were in there cleaning up that with a chipper also. So we'll bump down. I don't want to forget Branch 5 that's down here. I talked about our structure group. They continue, down here on the Lone Pine Fire. We continue, this is in patrol status. We continue to daily send an engine or 2 from Perch down here just to check on that fire in Branch 5 also. I'll move over up into Branch 20. We'll start up here on the north by the Copper, Marlow, and Blue. For reference, here's Bean Ridge. The black you see here, dozer line, that line is completed. Went down Bean Ridge to as far as we could get, and then crews were put in some hand line that tied into a rock screed. That has been completed down to the 13 road. So we currently have crews from drop point 75A, which is right here just on the south end of the Elliott Fire, working south, and crews working north. And when I say crews, what I mean, it's a combination of massacators, some fallers, and hand crews all working together to complete this section of line. You can see we do have a small section of this completed. This morning, prediction it sounded like maybe 2 to 3 more days of work, and then we would have this chunk completed. Moving back around, we'll just keep going south from Beans Ridge down to the east side of Mosquito. This section of line right here, that's all been completed. The following along the fire perimeter on the east side, the snag following for hazardous trees. They're still doing some of that today. I don't believe they'll finish today, so they'll probably continue some of that tomorrow. You hit the very south end, 25, mastication line going towards Bluff Creek or Bigfoot right here. The mastication line has been put in, but there's about a mile of line that still needs to be cleaned up. And then from there, hand crews will go down into Bluff Creek. We'll continue around on the west side in Division November. This section from right up here, drop point 24, along the west side, all the way down here to drop point 48. That line has all been completed. That is where we currently have 4 chippers in. There's about 15 miles of line, probably at least 4-6 more days of chipping to clean that up. We did get from drop point 48 going towards Bluff Creek. The dozer line was put in, and then from that dozer line today, the plan, we had some hot shot crews, type 1 crews, move over there to help put that hand line in, light hand line in coordination with the local reeds down toward into Bluff Creek. You'll see, so where you see the black, that's where our containment lines are completed. So you will see this little piece up here to the north, where here's Bean Ridge, goes up to Go Road to drop point 22 and 24. That was started today with some masticators. Don't think that'll take a long time. That's been done before. So we have multiple masticators up there working with some crews to complete this section right here, which will tie that north end off. That completes branch 20. So we'll move over here to branch 40. It was condensed down into just one branch, and pretty much what's left over here on the lost fire is just suppression repair. So they're coordinating with the park to begin suppression repair and backhaul equipment and supplies. We do have a UAS, an unmanned aircraft system. It's a drone. It was over here flying, wanted them to fly these fires. It has infrared capability, so we can detect heat with it. The intent was to fly all these, check for heat. They weren't able to fly these south ones just because of the canopy. So when we're using that UAS, which I'll talk about before I end, where we're going next with that, if it's thick canopy, it's tough to get in there and penetrate. But they were able to, for example, there's a piece over here on the west side of the Lost Fire, steep, rugged country. They were able to fly that today and detect no heat. So that chunk of line where we didn't put people was able to be checked. So the plan moving forward, starting tomorrow, we'll bring that UAS drone over here. Right now, and it could change, but we've kind of prioritized areas where we're going to begin flying that and looking for heat. And right now, it's on the perch fire. I will visit with the 2 field operations and branch directors this evening, and that priority may change over to branch 20 based on what happened this afternoon. But the intent is to fly that starting tomorrow for the next several days. And that completes the update on the complex.
Hi everybody, my name is Brad Petruska. I'm the Strategic Operations Chief with Rock Mountain Team 1. Get that next one. So we roster Strategic Operations in addition to a number of other operations chief. My job is really to look at the fire environment, try to understand what's making the fires tick, and then plan accordingly. And by I mean plan accordingly, where should we be putting our people, our firefighters, so that they can have the best chance of doing what it is that they do out there. So that's really my job in a nutshell. The way I come about the conclusions that I'm going to get you to is through a number of different ways. One of them is just by looking at the weather, the historic weather, the weather that's forecast in the next 7 days. You can pick out trends, and you can start to pick out what's making a fire tick. So we can do that, and we've done that with these ones. Another way to do it is looking at the fuel moistures, and this is a chart, just a little chart of something called energy release component, and all that's telling you is how dry your fuels are relative to other years. So this black line is 2023. It got really hot there. Your fuels dried out a lot. All the lightning fires ignited, and we've had a couple of rain events that we'll get into how impactful those were here in a second. The little purple line is kind of where we're going in that next 7 days. But really, then we try to leverage stuff to see further into the future, just to see as much as we can of what the future might hold. So there's a bunch of different tools that we have to help us not know the future, but have a decent idea. By decent idea, I mean like probability based. So scale is 0 to 1, unlikely to it's going to happen. That's kind of the terms we're using when we're talking probabilities. Not so much the fire will get here by then. It's too far out to know that kind of stuff. But when we look at our ERCs and we start, seeing trends in fire activity, this black line is how much it burned each day when they were all doing their thing. When it's on an upswing, we get a little more acres, and when it goes down and when it gets rain, it doesn't, right? That's not that insightful, but we can do stuff with that information to help us see the future. When we add the influence of wind onto that, because fires like wind when they want to grow, we can start to separate it even further. We see that this year, right, this is with, oh man, does it do things when I touch it?
It does.
Oh, cool, all right. You touch it, everybody. So when, where even was I? Got excited. All right, so you can look at this black line, and this blue line is kind of your average fire year. Kind of looks something like that. This black line, most of the year has been under that, so you've had a below average year. Believe it or not, that's the truth of it. We've had much more severe fire seasons than the one you're in. When we come over here, we kind of separate it into different categories. We don't even see any days where you hit the top 2 categories that we look at, that very high and severe. So we just haven't been there this year. It's been a mild year. The rain certainly helped things out. That's the story of it. These fires, when they were growing, weren't growing aggressively. I think the biggest spread day on all of them was around 2,000 acres. That's not a lot for fires in this country to be growing in the grand scheme of things. So now to do it, of course. All right, so where do we go with this information? Well, we look at other times that what we would call a season-ending event. And there's multiple criteria of it. It's kind of everything's a choose-your-own adventure. And we just look at a bunch of information, like what Dan said. We try to come to a reasonable conclusion. So this is one example of when past fire seasons have ended, and kind of this probability curve. That blue line, how likely it is on the x-axis on the bottom based on time of year. That dashed line represents the rain event we just had. And this is basically saying on the previous chart, when do your fuel dryness levels get below what we would call a critical threshold and never come back from it. That dashed line is what we just had, and you've had events that have done that in the past. It's not super common to happen that early, but it's happened. So that's one piece of the information that we have. So the rains were impactful. There's been events like that before, and by events, I mean, then we try to say, okay, what's causing that? Why are those fuel conditions moderating? I have a little animation. So when we go through and we look at it, we look at really busy fire seasons. They tell us a lot about the landscape and the interaction of the fuels and the terrain and the weather and what that does to a fire. So we track that. We track it in busy seasons and slow seasons to see what's what. So if I put these on, these are 3 fairly active seasons you guys have had in the last decade, 2017, 2020, and 2021. The trend that sticks out from all of these is there's kind of this double dip phenomenon that goes on. So you get one rain event, not that much, it doesn't have to be much rain, that causes that first little dip. then things dry out for about a week or so, and then you get another second larger event. That's what's driving these ERC drops that we see through all of this stuff. So when we put that in context with these large fire years, we see that pattern develop, and then we go and we look at the year we're in. Here's how much rain fell on a bunch of different weather stations all around the area. That little green line is us, so there's event number 1. Here's event number 2. Event number 2 set new maximums. That was the wettest one-day period in the past 13 years or so in this data set. So we look at that, we're like, cool, we've got the 2 events. That's given us some more confidence. We're not there that like, oh, everything's done, everybody can go home. That's not where we go with all of this. But, looking back, we've got the first dip, we've got the second dip. So it's meeting the things that we're picking up on right there with that rain event. Oh boy, that one gets really busy, but I can explain it. So then we look at the fuel dryness levels of every single other year, because everybody's like, well, I remember in '02, meaning whatever, this weird thing happened. It's like, okay, we can account for that. What happens if, the rest of the year was exactly the same as any other year, and you start from where you are right now, and you should show it out the rest of the year, and then does it get to a critical level? When you look at it from a few days ago, where we expected to be, we're actually still a little lower than where that purple line thought we were going to be, which is great from a critical fuels perspective. But we're not really going anywhere up into this critical level where like, oh, it's going to be a big fire day, right? If we're given briefings like, we think this is going to happen today, that's not where we're headed right now, based on a lot of different data points. But this really helps paint the picture that, only this red line, which was 2010 of all years, that had, the kind of rises in fuel dryness level that we would see and be concerned about. And 2010 wasn't a huge year locally in the grand scheme. So that gives us some confidence, like, hey, yeah, we might have experienced that event that's going to keep a lid on things through the duration until those rains in the fall and winter later on actually do show up. So we take all of that information, but there's, we want more, because that's just how we are, and then we look at other data points. So we look at like satellite heat detections. Those things are logged, and they're really helpful because other than just showing you where the heat is, this is from this morning. We every night we fly an aircraft that, similar to the UAS, flies infrared all over everything, gives us really detailed information where the heat is, how hot it is, things like that we can put into our fire behavior models. Well, that plane had an issue last night, it didn't fly over us. So we look at things like this, satellite heat detections, to help illuminate where the heat still is. You see Blue Creek 2, Copper, Perch, all have satellite heat detections. Perch's heat detections are on the offside of the big ridge that's out there. So we use that to verify like what we're hearing, what we're seeing, especially when you're in a large geographic area. Satellites do a good job of just putting you in the area, right? We're not going to get the same level of detail, but also within this stuff is this metric called fire radiative power. So it grades how intense the heat that it detects is. And you can download all that stuff, and wouldn't you know it, 2017, 20, and 21 were really, really busy years around here. And then you can compare it to what 2023 had so far. Not all that much satellite-derived intensity. Yeah, there's 17, 18,000 acres of fire out there, but relative to where you've been in the past and how intensely that fire was picked up by satellite, it's really not all that much. Where that gets the point is we can put it in another kind of chart. We can say, okay, by what date is like 80% or 90% of all that heat that's been detected over those decades happened? And what we see is that, by what date did I put? September 15th, right? So we're right in that ballpark. Every year, with the exception of some relatively slow years down there where they have like one fire and that accounts for everything that year, almost every year, 90%, 80% or so of all the fire intensity that's been detected has occurred by that date. So that gives us more confidence in a totally different way of looking at it, not from weather, not from fire nature, but from, well, how much heat has the satellite detected on its really regular flyovers. So we get that, and we say, okay, great. So we're pretty confident that our fuels aren't going to return to like a critical state. You just think through it logically. Then the days get shorter. You lose 24 hours of daylight every week. going forward through the month of September. That's 2 whole hours that the fires need to miss out on active burning conditions going forward. But there's still concerns out there. One of them that we've heard several times is east winds, so we can look for those basically. How likely are those? When do they usually happen? They usually happen in mid-September. These are wind roses, like showing you how frequent the winds are from different directions at 2 different weather stations that are on ridge tops. It comes out to about a half day a year, and that day is usually in September. So about every other September or so, there's an east wind event. And by east wind, to put that in context, we're not talking further north on the Cascades, Labor Day 2020 style. That's not the intensity of wind that occurs here. Your terrain is different, your canyons are aligned differently. There's a whole lot of terrain blocking the overall east-west wind pattern that's out there. These wind events are usually like 10 to 12 miles an hour from the northeast or southeast. So yes, it's an unusual direction that allows fire to find new avenues and stuff like that, but they're not that strong. So we can quantify that. We can run what-if scenarios, and we have, okay, if our fuels are below an average state and we put that east wind on it, what would it do to these fires over ridiculously long amounts of time? And the answer for these fires is not much. It really doesn't do much when you combine the work that's been put in to protecting the values, specifically on perch, with the fact that that's about a 4,000 foot tall ridge. Winds react to trees, they react to terrain. You don't get the same wind speed in the valley that you get on the ridge. That's called sheltering. So we know that this area is really sheltered from those east wind events. Certainly there's going to be eddies, there's going to be swirly winds, but from a straight line east wind, Orleans is not well situated to have aggressive east winds coming right through the community. Other areas a little bit more, but so we look at stuff like that and we play what ifs and we put it into our strategic plans, contingencies. Where are the things that are important on the landscape? What can we do to provide protection to them in the event that we have one of these relatively rare but common enough that we all know about events? So this kind of takes us to longer term outlooks. This, I want to give a disclaimer. I'm going to guess with the number of teams that have come through the community of Orleans and had meetings, most of you have seen a map like this. This is called fire spread probability. The colors are not perimeters. So don't, even though this one's fairly tame, don't assume that this means much of anything other than in a 2-week period, if no suppression action at all happened on these fires short of lines that we already have in, what is the probability of any point? I'll point out that we're in Orleans right there in an area that we would say is outside of the probability surface. So from where the heat is and could possibly ignite anything, combined with the containment actions that have happened so far, there's no fire model there. So you could say there's no probability. Most people are uncomfortable with that phrase. So it's very, very, very rare that anything would happen. And then you also start to layer on the assumptions of a model like this that you can't be out suppressing the fire while the model is running. It doesn't allow for that to happen. So when we look at this and we look at the fires and we model the few just to see, well, what's the threat to, or what's the level of coordination that we need to have with other adjacent incident management teams. We light a few of their fires on fire. They don't mind. It's all right. It's for planning. But we look at that and then we look at it in terms of probabilities. We can ask ourselves questions. What are the odds or the probability of Blue Creek 2 and I think that one's Marlow Verging. We see it's in the yellow, so we say it's 40 to 59%. It's about 50-50 that those two fires, even though they're less than a quarter mile away, that they'll actually merge.
Does that take into account the next day's back ones?
The next day is what?
Then the next day's back ones.
The next day is backbones.
No, back birds, any
Oh.
fire operation.
So that would be a suppression action. We can model, like if you did an ignition when this thing started, we can put that in and light it in the model, but we can't continue that. Just like you can't have this going on at the same time that you would fly a tanker and put a crew on an edge of a fire. It doesn't allow for that. So it's a huge limitation of all this stuff, but what we use it for is our strategic planning. So we say, okay, if we didn't do anything in the next 2 weeks, what do we feel like the odds are of X? And we look at something like this, and we're like, well, you know, if it's really tight, it's a little higher, but this also gives us an idea for those rare event scenarios. This pink band, you can see, is less than 0.2% of all the thousands and thousands of days of fires that were modeled in this. Really rare event, but we want to know about that because we never want to paint this picture that the future is known, and we can see it because we can't. So that's why we communicate with products like this. That's why we develop our plans with products like this. I guess I'll hit it again because I keep forgetting I can do that. So what does this all mean? It means, if you go back to your weather, what we would typically classify as a season-ending event has occurred on this fire. That doesn't mean the fires are done. It doesn't mean they're not going to spread it anymore. That's not what it means. What it means is you're in a new fire environment than when these fires started. So you kind of have to realign yourself with the way the fires are going to be burning into the future because of that event. We can see it in the past. We're pretty confident that that just happened right now. Doesn't mean the fires are done, doesn't mean the season's over, doesn't mean everybody's packing up and going home. What it means is we're in a new environment and we're going to operate as if we're in a new environment, not for the plants that were previously built on the old environment. It's just part of the cycle of how we update our thinking through time. Yeah, so that's kind of that point. The probabilities now compared to a few weeks ago, you can look outside your window and intuitively know that the odds of impact to Orleans or to any of these places that we care about are substantially lower from any kind of fire we wouldn't want impacting. Those odds are a lot lower. The reason we talk probability is when we talk about this concept of risk, probability is about 1/2 of that. We care about what happens if it were to happen, and then we care about the odds of it happening, and that's kind of helping us define risk to any given value that might be out there. So going back to the rare events, even if fuels were dry enough to carry fire, and they're drying out, and they'll carry fire in some places. That's not a thing I'm saying that won't happen, but you know, you have to weigh the balance of the dryness of the fuels against the strength of the wind. Your fuels are down here, the wind's going to be here. There's a big difference in that kind of a imbalance than there is in a critically dry year with the same level of wind. So we look at all that stuff, and then we revalidate all the things operations is doing. We make a bunch of plans for the future, and then we ask our decision makers who we work for what comes next. And so I think that's my transition to Nolan.
So that was a bunch of good information. First one, before I start, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nolan Colgrove from District Ranger here locally. I know there's some folks online, so they may not know me. Most of the folks in here do. So I wanted to start by saying thanks to Lee for opening it up and welcoming us to their office here. Really appreciate the ability to have a spot here locally that's big enough to house an audience. Over at the Forest Service, we don't have a big enough place, so thanks, appreciate it. And I want to thank IC Dallas for answering the call to come out and help. So they're coming out from from a long ways away to come out here and help. And one of the things that they adopted right off the bat was the ability to kind of work together and see how we can collaborate, see how we can listen to the community together, work through all of those things. And they've been really good at listening to a lot of those things that are important to us. So one of the things we first said was our relationships that we have with our partners out in this part of the world is extremely important. And they grasp that concept and they're running with it really well. So, and there are many others in terms of like putting the fire out, keeping people safe. There's a lot of other values out there, but that relationship piece was really good. So that's the reason for the meeting tonight, is to share information with you all, folks that are online, and answer questions that you might have, or maybe clear up anything that seems unclear to you. We're in a better place than we were. I think it was a week ago we were here, or a little bit more than that, and we were talking about the situation at the time, and you really couldn't see the top of Somes Mountain at that time. It was pretty smoky, but you could hear the fire up there. You could hear it backing down towards your places and perch out there. Maybe you could hear it over on Red Cap a little. So today, you can see it all. Today's nice and clear. The rain really helped out a lot to help us get us to that point. But I wanted to share something from the last meeting that we talked about. If you look at the perch and you look just above the water tank and you're looking back up in the gorge there to this area, back up through here, there was a fair amount of that was not burned as of whatever it was a week ago when we were here. And you know, that made a lot of people nervous. The east winds, even though you know the weather has moderated, it doesn't look like they'll you know transpire and pick up and be strong. Nevertheless, we're in that boat to always look at what the worst case scenario might be. So at that point in time, we said that we would try to take the belly out of that beast, and we backed that fire off the hill, filled in some of those unburned holes, and that was the strategy that we're using to reduce that risk. And so it was pretty successful. And success is, you know, in the eyes of the beholder. So one of the things that was mentioned to us is we don't want a big burn scar up there. We want you to take the belly out of the beast, but we don't want a big burn scar. So we did it carefully. The last team did some strategic looks at how to make that happen and not burn the hillside up at the same time. Back that fire off, similar to the way tribes used to manage fire, back it down off the slopes, do it in a more low intensity sort of situation, and that's kind of what happened. Although there still was fire out in the mountain, kind of doing its own thing a little bit. So there were some runs. You see that run that was just to the south side of the telephone repeater that cooked that piece that cooked back in 2006 or 8 and reburned again. So there was some hot areas in there. But the stuff right above the water tank, Ricky's line out the old road there, that stuff all came down pretty light. But we tied that in. So that was a mission accomplished. These guys finished it, that the other team started it. And we anticipated, or we couldn't anticipate the rain all that much. It was forecasted. Somebody never trust the forecaster that says 50% chance of that, 50% chance of this. So you want to make sure that you kind of take those precautions. So we went forward with that, and I think we're in a better place. So feedback stuff has changed, the situation has changed, and so I think the level of questions we've been getting, the energy level is a lot less. So I hope people have been able to sleep at night to some degree. I know the fire's still on the mountain, but we're in a quite a bit better spot than we were. And so from here on out, we're looking at what we might do. So you heard the really cool sort of high-tech technology and science behind how you can predict whether or not we had a season-ending event, whether or not the fire might pick up here or there, and the probability of that. We know we still have the month of September, so the forecast that we looked at there, the probability map of 14 days, there's probably a little bit more of September left than that. So there's a little bit more fire season beyond that. So we have to plan accordingly to that. So we're still looking at places that we will maybe take more actions, but we're basing those off of risk of where we put our firefighters. So if you look up near the Marlow and the Blue Creek 2 fire, which is up towards the top there, you don't see a whole lot of activity out in that wilderness area where there's fire. It's not real active. It's creeping and crawling around. Haven't seen no big runs in it, but it is flanking and lateral fire activity. But if you go just to the north and east of it, just probably about a quarter mile, you're right at Rock Creek View, and you're right in the middle of a snag patch that was created in one of the fires previously. I think it was 2008, and that's an area that you don't want to put a lot of firefighters in, to go out there where the values at risk are really low. And so we haven't been doing that. We haven't been putting firefighters' lives at risk and working around some of those areas. We're punching the roads in here and there, but not putting people out there going direct on some of these. So that's been pretty successful so far. Once the teams came in, originally, I mentioned at the meeting previously that when we first started this, we were pretty aggressive at going everywhere. We weren't long-term planning. We were triaging and trying to put the fire out immediately. And when you're doing that, you're not looking at those risks as closely. You're letting the firefighters on the ground make those calls because it's initial attack. Well, we've had two tree strikes, which means firefighters were working around those snags, and the snag fell and hit them. We have a guy with a broken leg, we have a guy that broke his back. So that's why we do the calculated risk on where we go and where we put firefighters, because it is a real thing. And then when you get into an area that's extremely large with snags like that Rock Creek Butte area and then out towards Flint Valley there, it's even more so dangerous because there's snags all over. It's just a big, massive snag patch. So we're looking at areas where we will try to get the best results where we're going to put our efforts, and that's what we're planning. And so this team comes with a SOCAL planner, which is really cool. Dan has a lot of forethought and how he looks at things and brought a SOCAL planner to help us strategic operations plan person to look at what we want to do in the long term. So that's what we're planning. And that information you heard about what the weather's going to do in the next couple of weeks, what the fire behavior is going to do in the next couple of weeks versus the values, that's going to help us make those kind of decisions of where we want to go. At the same time, this community has really beat Forest Service over the head with not missing an interval when there's a chance to let fire not run its course, but kind of herd that fire around or go out to a containment line or confine those fires, the wildfire, to a certain area where it's not running into those values at risk. So we're looking at doing that right now. So we'll look at not missing that return interval and not deferring that risk. So we spend a lot of time talking about that kind of stuff in terms of the strategic risks that we want to take. So we are looking at that. We're coming up with a long-term plan. Probably will be done, sounds like tomorrow afternoon or so. And that will help inform some of those longer range type things, because we will still be here throughout until it does rain everything out. So with that, I just wanted to share that of where we're planning on going. And say that the team has a good group of liaisons, a good group of public information officers in addition to all the other normal C&G staff. So if you have questions, they're there for you. If you want to have a sidebar, we'll stick around here afterwards. And if you're not getting information, we'll get your contact info and we'll get that information to you. But these meetings are for you. These meetings are intended for you to get as much information as you need. So with that, thank you for coming this evening, and thank the team for putting this meeting together. And we'll be sticking around for any questions or anything. So I think somebody else is going to MC from here. Thank you.
Are there any questions that you have right now, or do you just want to break and go to the maps and have one-on-one conversations? Yes, sir.
It seems like the firefighting effort has been hampered by the outdated cedar root rot policy of the Forest Service. Is there any chance that that's going to be reevaluated, since it doesn't seem to have done any good and it hampers the local water sources from being used for firefighting?
So that success again is in the eye of the beholder. So what might not be successful to some, it might not be the same to others. So the policy has been in place for quite some time now, and the effectiveness of it is measured by how well those uninfected trees are surviving. And so there are groups of uninfected trees. And so you can look at it, well, it might be, slowing things down a little on one end, but there are many mitigation measures that we do, not just with Porter for cedar, but we do other mitigations for other resources as well. And we work through those. And when we don't, the public will beat us over the head that we're not watching out for those things that we're required to. So we do make sure that we're following those mitigations. Sometimes that looks good to some people, sometimes it doesn't look good to some people. So the beauty is in the eye of the beholder there.
Thank you, Rowan. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. On Perch, is there a possibility that there'll be more firing operations? This update dated today says not planned, but do you recommend it if conditions allow? Is now the time to do it?
Yeah, currently, we do not have any actions planned, but I'll point point out here, where the firing ended over here. Just, right around this drop point 11, the intention was to go further to the north. And due to weather, it got shut down. So we still have, no, you're good. We still have the plan in place, and are ready to implement if needed, but there's no plan right now to do that. But we're ready if, whether fire behavior dictates that we would need to.
And then, just a little question, do we get to keep our hoses and sprinklers at least through September, or when, until the fire season is considered done?
We will, our folks, especially around your homes, we will not pull those yet. Until, we have a structure protection specialist, group supervisor running around out there. And those will, I would venture to say those will be in place when we leave. So whoever comes in next, or however the organization goes next, is when, eventually they'll be removed. I can't tell you when, but we have no plans currently to pull those.
Follow-up question real quick on that one. That's your jobs, but it seems to me that you put all that effort into putting that road and pan line from the Reese Ranch over to Picky Guy, the north end of Birch Creek. It's just, you have all that burnt, a little bit of unburnt piece there, which maybe now that we have that supposed season in advance for the fire season. It's just, maybe just light that one bit of line that you did, just let it just creep into where it's already burned, and then you have that future protection, later on down the line.
Yeah, very.
Tries out enough.
You're talking to the north.
Yes, that north speed, the Reese Ranch shot, I can't see the drop point from here, but it's 11, I think. I'm not sure, but then,
Yeah.
finish out that burnout there, which is the burnout, the street you're firing to get that away from that private property and those pieces there, and then that way you just turn that building black.
Yep, and we have looked at that, and our folks on the ground, the one concern that we have, if we did just go out there and do that, and again, it would be a strategic operation, and where would we check it up? What we're concerned about is if we started that, if we had to carry it, it didn't check up, we had to carry it further to the north, and we're committed going all the way up into drop point 19, all the way up to the north here. Then we're committed from there almost doing the whole big box block. We can let it do its thing where it can, but once we start, from the folks, we've just determined that we could be committed to going all the way up. We've looked at that hard. I totally understand what you're saying, and that's why the first intent was to get there, to get it all the way behind us, and it just got,
So you're saying there's that little unburnt piece between drop point 11 and the edge of the fire one is there, correct?
there is, going to the north.
Yeah, so there's
Yeah.
something tied in.
Correct, there is.
But keep that in mind, it would be nice if it's possible. The conditions allow that.
And my question is about roads, specifically the road from the pavement going up Birch Creek. I know that our road was pretty rough to begin with, and I noticed that the number, the fire traffic, they've gone into the ditch, and it looks like they've made some new runoff areas. So, are there plans for actual road maintenance on that part of Birch Creek, all the way up to what the sign says, walking
We so, I don't know if I have to go up there, but we'll do a suppression repair plan for all the damage that we caused when we were suppressing the fire. And it includes roads, it includes any of the water holes that we used, any dozer lines that we made, any brush that we put up on the sides. We'll try to mitigate all of that in our suppression repair plan.
At that point, Nolan, is there an opportunity for community members to provide input for like water lines or where the ditch may need to be done carefully?
For the ditch part, yeah, water line's a little different story.
I mean, water lines that may be buried.
Yeah, we'll develop a map. So we have reeds. Right now, Aaron Rentz is off for a little bit. We have Styles is backing her up. We'll identify all of those things that we'll need to do for suppression repair in that plan, and it'll have a big list. We'll have a map that's just like this, just for repair. And there probably is a way that we can have that here locally. You guys could share it with folks and see if we missed anything on those particular areas. Does that work?
Yeah. How shortly after things are wrapped up is that plan? Does it boom happen? 'Cause I'm just curious on the timeline. Like, let's say they decide the season-ending events happen, they're pulling resources. When do those suppression repairs take?
That's a good question. We have to balance out with the number of resources we have. So if we have enough resources to, and we know that the fire is out and it's not going to cause any more issues in that area, like Lone Pine at the bottom down there, it's pretty well buttoned up. It's not going to move out of there. We could start doing stuff down there, but on Perch we can't because we don't know what's going to happen on Perch yet. We have to wait until that's done, and then we have to balance what resources we have. So if we're still fighting fire, but we only have a set amount of resources, we have to keep them on the suppression side until we can break enough free from suppression to go over and start the repair. But there's not a clean date like September 22nd. It's really dependent on the situation. So I can't tell you yet what's going to happen in 10 days.
Yeah, okay. It's just don't want to be like, oh, it's happening in 2 days. I just want to have time to talk to whoever's about to do it.
It'll take us a little, it usually takes a week or a while to get that. You have to go out and look at it, they have to make sure that they get it all mapped, it's on a Venza.
Yes.
Two questions.
One, I don't know who knows this, but I have to say this to the meeting, is special repair on the tank, the road that goes up to the community water tank. So let's not forget that piece as well. I know you guys on the radar, you're just getting the samples and all that. But also, this is not a question for me, but for my lovely wife, is when do they anticipate lifting the evacuation rule? That's a sheriff question, but it's a team question too.
Yeah, we have a meeting tomorrow. We'll make a recommendation tomorrow to the sheriff. So stay tuned for tomorrow.
It's all right, I'm not.
Yes.
My name is Eric Nelson, I'm the fire chief of the Williams Fire Department, and I have a couple of requests from the team. It's come to my attention that some of the firefighters, they just need to slow down when coming through town. School's in session, there are people walking along the roadside, I really appreciate that. The other thing is I'm working with the community liaison program, and what we noticed specifically today was there was kind of a lack of notice of this community meeting. So one of my employees called me up and was like, hey, community members are asking me, is there a meeting? And I looked at the sandwich board outside and it said Wednesday, 6 p.m., but there was no date. I didn't know if that was old, I didn't know if that was referring to next week. So I put today's date on there after they called DNR and confirmed that there was a meeting here. So I'd like to see at least 24 to 48 hours of notice to the community so people can participate. I think there would be a lot more people here in the community if that notification went out a little bit sooner. And then lastly, I just want to say the community is really appreciative of all the efforts that the teams and the firefighters have done. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
I would also just like to thank you all for the care and consideration you took around the smaller community water tanks and our spring and shared community spring line in the firing operations zone. Those are great. So thank you for that. Thank you.
All with that, I think we will conclude the meeting tonight. As mentioned, we will be around afterwards. If you want to meet at one of the maps on the wall, we would be more than happy to continue answering any questions that you have. Thank you all for coming, and the meeting is on Facebook. It will be saved for future viewing, so anyone that missed the meeting tonight, unfortunately, will be able to watch it. Thank you.